because these establishments are reviewed by users, by Johns, and it's just like a Yelp or something like that. And they go on and they review these places. And we looked at the most reviewed in Houston, which is where my office is based out of. Yes. And of the top 100 reviewed, less than 30% had licenses. So it's a big problem. So those bills are focused on providing greater, better laws to allow county and city attorneys to go after these places. And even with our deceptive trade practices bill, to allow visitors of these places, like people that are actually looking for a legitimate massage, they could go after these places as well if they're injured or something like that as a result of patronizing.
What were those bill numbers again, one more time?
So for the set-aside bill, that's HB 269, and then for the massage establishment bill, that's related to evidence for nuisance and abatement lawsuits, which the city and county attorneys use to shut these places down. That's going to be HB 240 by Anna Hernandez.
My goal is always to educate the advocates and to establish for them some best practices. I love what Jennifer said. She did a great job at walking us through what that looks like. And each of us has to begin thinking about public health as a challenge when it comes to the human trafficking arena, because it is a public health issue, and there are areas of prevention, intervention, education, restoration. All of this has to be comprehensively thought about. We can't just focus on one particular area and think that we're doing a good job at changing the mix of the whole. For instance, I've served on the Office of the Attorney General's Human Trafficking Prevention Task Force since January of 2010. January of 2010, can you believe it's 7 years? And there's prevention in the name. Not a lot of prevention is really happening. There's a lot of education that's happened with it, but when it comes to focusing on the preventive aspects, I think we have to be thinking more comprehensively and holistically, and each of these pieces of the puzzle are important. So when I try to educate advocates, it's really looking at the whole picture and seeing where each of them funnel into the aspects of public health and how do we address all of them, because just addressing one piece of it when the other piece, particularly demand, which is one of the pieces that Children at Risk is focused with, that's with their CEASE initiative as a part of a national endeavor. We've got to start focusing on demand. Without demand, no supply, right? So we have to start thinking about those pieces and how they connect with one another. So it's always, for me, educating the advocates and those out there in the field to make an empowerment piece happen for them so that they can begin to understand it, start looking at it more comprehensively, and then act on the pieces that they're really passionate about, because that's where they're going to get the best traction, but also how that it interplays with the other pieces of the puzzle.
So my primary job at TASA as a human trafficking specialist, along with my coworker Alex Parati, is to provide training. So training for law enforcement, social service providers, community members. We do a lot of training with Homeland Security throughout the Valley, different parts of Texas. We go and we help start coalitions on human trafficking. So the education piece is very important. The prevention piece is very important. And knowing the best kind of services to provide our survivors. And I appreciate the fact that Jennifer mentioned from victim to healing, survivor, and empowerment. And I think that's a really important piece. And so I feel like HB 269, the set-aside bill, is really important. And something that we can look to the how much that's been ineffective and how much potential for good that can do is if you look at larger cities that have prostitution diversion courts. And I know that's something that here in Travis County that they are working on, and I know that it's an area that still needs more work. So in our experience, seeing survivors have the opportunity to get their lives back after being trafficked is really important. On the other side of the legislative agenda, TASA, we have a lobby day on February 14th along with Texas Council on Family Violence. And so this is where we're going to be promoting bills that support survivors of gender-based violence across the board. So supporting domestic violence shelters, rape crisis centers, and making sure that they have access to the resources to do the work that affect the most vulnerable people. And we know that that's who are being trafficked. Our youth, our children, immigrants, they are the most vulnerable people, and they are the ones that are most affected by cuts to funding to these areas.
Let me just say something about that bill, because one of the challenges is how we communicate about this issue of set aside, because there have been other states who've done this, who've taken a lot of heat, and the media spin on it has been particularly difficult, because they've tried to say that we're allowing these kids to get away with things that, or people to get away with things that they shouldn't. And I think it's going to be really important that we look at that, and I would love for Children at Risk to take on the challenge of how we communicate this effectively for public consumption, because the media is going to take it and run with it. Anytime we do safe haven or set aside, the media is going to have a heyday with it. So we need to be looking for those that communicate well what the goals and objectives of that bill are, and mirroring what they say, and being very careful in our public discourse about what the objectives are, so that we're getting the best possible outcomes for the victims, and that the media doesn't run with it like they've done with the California stuff and just completely politicize it and derail it. And so just want to encourage you to be watching Children at Risk verbiage about that.
So what are other challenges that are facing human trafficking advocates this session?
So, as my co-panelists mentioned, definitely prevention and demand. I mean, I think those are the biggest challenges that we still see. We do have a lot of capacity for rescuing and rehabilitation. We've really built that up with the different task forces around the state. But prevention remains a big issue, and then the demand. So with the demand, as you mentioned, Children at Risk is part of the CEASE network, which is Cities Empowered Against Sexual Exploitation, and their main focus is to reduce demand. So part of that, we are pushing for better requirements for curriculum for John schools across the state, and then to better track data of prostitution arrests, so that law enforcement agencies can figure out who they're arresting and why they can't focus on the proper culprits, which are the buyers. So it wasn't until just a couple of years ago that the charge for prostitution was split into buyer and seller. So just 2-3 years ago, law enforcement agencies didn't even know who was buying and who was selling. It was just one prostitution charge. So now that we have that split apart, we need to better track that data so that it can guide our tactics to reduce demand. So that's really important. And then as far as prevention, a lot of that is going to be figuring out how to address the social services system for a lot of these victims that wind up in a trafficking situation. We've seen high correlations from the foster care system to trafficking. And so figuring out how to provide those services, whether it be improving employment programs for people coming out of foster care, and improving their housing options and things like that. So, because those are two of the main reasons that people get involved in prostitution or a trafficking situation, is the lack of adequate employment or lack of adequate housing.
There's a couple things that I think we really need to focus on. One is maintaining the continuance of the Human Trafficking Prevention Task Force at the Office of the Attorney General. And the reason that that's so crucial is that they've been the locus of bringing together numerous state agencies, many of which still are just becoming part of this task force. And because of the siloed nature of the way the government works, we've really got to break that down and have a matrix that allows various parts of the government that address the specific issues to have voice at the table, as well as being educated about where this intersects with their work and how they can more adequately provide resources and how that looks. And we've got to stop the siloed effect of we deal with children at this age, we deal with children at this age, we deal with children about these issues, you know, all of this different kind of stuff, because all of it comes together, whether they're immigrants or whether they're our children or, you know, whatever it is, it has to be broken down at some point. And I think the OAG's office has done a really good job at bringing those people to the table. But the sunset on that is coming, and I don't know if you guys are tweeters or not, but I tweeted Ken Paxton and the governor yesterday with the news report that came out of the UT study about we cannot afford to lose this locus of a way to bring together the key players, okay? So that's important to make sure that we continue this good work that's been happening since 2010. And the other piece is to look at a single point of contact in our state that affects any child who's been sex trafficked, specifically sex trafficking, because since the last legislative session, the governor's office has initiated the child sex trafficking unit headed by Andrea Sparks, and she has a staff that's really hitting the ground running, who have a great deal of knowledge and information across the state, one of which your colleagues got lost too, but that's all good because what it does is bring pieces that Children at Risk has been doing to the governor's office, and we need to be thinking about that as a centralized focus of how to navigate the systems and the landmines of the system so that we bring those pieces together. And a piece of that is the financial. And this is probably the most crucial because our children in the systems that are currently in place are not getting the financial resources necessary, even if they're assigned to a restoration home that's designed for children who've been sex trafficked victims. The level of payment that they get, the compensation that comes from different funding buckets is not happening. And it needs to be, I think that the governor's office can help to navigate that, but this financial bucket system hasn't allowed the monies to come in to assist those victims in their restoration and care. And so I think that's another challenge for us, that we really need to be thinking about how we help them to bring the resources to bear that are already there and distribute them equitably to the youth who need them at this point, or all victims who need them at this point. Anytime we talk about money, it's always a challenge, but I think it's already there if we could just get them to release it in a way that will help the victims, the survivors, the most.
I agree with that, and I definitely echo the stopping the siloing. And I feel like that's something that happens with a lot of issues, but specifically human trafficking. Some people say, okay, well, we only want to work with minors, we only want to work with, domestic, or, and I think it's drawing the line between all forms of gender-based violence. And I think that's when you're really more likely going to see a holistic change, is when you understand the problem from a deeper level. And one of the things when we talk about money and lack of resources, I think once again I'm going to say any kind of legislation, whether it's federal, whether it's state, that's going to take money away from children, whether it's through our public education system, whether it's through healthcare. When people lose healthcare, when people lose jobs, when people lose access to affordable housing, that's when they are most vulnerable. And when we talk about our most vulnerable, we talk about our kids in our foster care systems and our CPS kids and our CPS workers. And so when you take funding away from those critical areas, you're taking funding away from survivors, and you're decreasing the likelihood that they can get out of these situations. Get out, stay out. And one of the things that I think that we forget about as when we work with trafficking survivors is that they are the most vulnerable to being trafficked again because of those same issues. And so really having long-term case management, long-term support for counseling, healing, shelter, safety. So if you don't have resources for that long-term healing process, then that's when you're going to have those higher rates of recidivism. So I would say just pay attention to any kind of legislation affecting funding.